At the Rigarden Magical Academy, the only thing that matters is talent for sorcery, and those who lack this gift are despised by both students and masters. Wil Serfort of the Rizanth race is one of these humiliated students, but his determination keeps him from giving up on finding his place in the sun, even though his real talent remains invisible to those around him. In search of answers, he continues to venture into the dungeons to hone his skills with his faithful sword, Wil's companion that compensates for his lack of magical ability. Set in the magical capital of Rigarden, this academy for sorcerers offers lessons on the properties of elements and how they can be used to invoke spells. One of the institution's teachers, Wil Serfort, explains how to catalyze a bright flame using Balka ore and Agni powder. To demonstrate, Edward calls on Wil, who along with his familiar Kiki was distractedly sketching in his notebook. Startled, he responds to the summons with some reluctance, knowing he would likely fail the task once again. As his classmates laugh and await his failure, Wil hesitates before beginning the catalysis until he receives a final nudge from the professor, who also seemed doubtful of the young student. Sure enough, Wil Serfort fails to perform one of the simplest procedures, causing the class to burst into laughter, except for one girl. Impatient, Edward highlights to the entire class that a student of the institution is incapable of using even the most basic magic. Without mincing words, he states that Wil is beyond saving. Sion Ulster, sticking his nose where it doesn't belong, unleashes a flame that nearly explodes the classroom bench. The professor reprimands the boy, who with a cynical tone claims he was just trying to help a fellow student who's not at his best. After that, Edward casts a spell that dissipates the flames and emphasizes that the supremacy of magic in this world is absolute, and that the heroes of this civilization have always been and always will be mages. Therefore, what determines your worth in this place is your aptitude for sorcery. With that said, he finally invites all those who have dreams greater than what can be achieved here to leave. After yet another failed class, Wil sighs deeply as Sion approaches with two friends, Lyral Mars and Gordon Barrett. As always, the talented mage belittles his classmate, mentioning the boy's expedition into the dungeons to defeat those weak monsters. At that moment, Wil's only true friend, Colette Loire, steps in to put an end to the nonsense. For a moment, Sion is intimidated by the girl's determination, but he quickly resumes his tough guy stance, asserting that effort is not enough to develop in sorcery, much less to become a Magia Vander. With that, he leaves, recalling Professor Edward's words about giving up. Afterward, Colette encourages her friend, saying that people are being ridiculous by making Wil the butt of their jokes, but he has come to accept it after swallowing for so long the notion that people without talent for magic are useless. Besides, as long as he has a beautiful girl like Colette to lean on, he considers himself a lucky guy. Taken aback, Colette complains that he always comes out with these things out of nowhere, so he justifies it by saying he learned to compliment women from a young age, and moreover, he wasn't lying when he said that his classmate is a beauty. Almost as if under a spell cast by Wil, the girl begins to blush with embarrassment and tells him to cut it out. Coming from a noble family, Colette Loire isn't supposed to act impulsively, but sometimes she just can't help it. Regardless, out of nowhere, Wil starts acting strangely, saying that today is a beautiful day. Colette adds that the Magia Vander, the most powerful mages, are surely protecting the sky. Speaking of which, a long time ago, people knew nothing about the sky as they were trapped in darkness. Terrorized by celestial invaders, one day, the world was blessed with the alliance of 5 mages who united to expel these enemies. By casting a seal on the sky, they were able to restore peace to civilization. Since then, the title of Magia Vander has been passed down as the highest honor among the sorcerer class, and every inhabitant of this land has dreamed of reaching that level at some point. Colette asks if the wand of the Ice Maiden Albusvina is looking after them today, and Wil is sure she is. He imagines her sitting near a window looking directly at them. With this image projected in his mind, he recalls his childhood when his friend Elfaria said that the sun and moon float in the real sky, and that on the other side of the sky there is a beautiful sunset that turns everything bright red. According to her, if you get as close to the sky as possible at the top of the tower, by becoming a Magia Vander, you can see the sunset. Excited by the story, Wil asks to see this scene with his friend one day, and the two make a promise. In his mind, it was just a silly promise between two kids, but he always believed it was possible to achieve. This belief proved true true as Elfaria became the youngest to earn the title of Maja Vander and ascended to the top of the tower. On the other hand, Wil relies solely on the strength of his promise to stay strong in the face of challenges which constantly remind him that he doesn't have the talent necessary to reach the top of the tower alongside his friend. And in the ebb and flow of these days, Professor Werkner Norgram scolds the student for going to the dungeon again, this time alone to the 7th floor. At this rate, Werkner is sure that Wil will die any day now. Brazenly, the student apologizes, but wants to know if he'll earn credits for the excursion. Werkner is annoyed with the boy, but since the death of an evil guardian was confirmed, he grants 2 credits to the student. Once the stubborn boy decided not to give up on becoming a Vander mage, the master warned him that before ascending the tower, Wil must advance to the Superior Institute. To do this, he needs many credits in each subject, writing, spellcasting, and practice. But since Wil is unable to earn credits in spellcasting, he has to find a way to compensate in the other areas. The young man doesn't seem disheartened by the news, but Werkner makes it clear that it's practically impossible to advance with practice credits alone. Moreover, the boy's graduation is at risk, so he must earn 4 credits by the end of the week to stay on track. Wil is shocked by this, as there are only 2 days left, so he opens a notebook right then and there to frantically research a monster that would give him the 4 credits he needs. Seeing the young man's distress, Werkner informs him that there is a Baskerville on the 6th floor, and Wil gives him a grateful hug. Hearing the conversation from outside the room, Sion Ulster takes the opportunity to ruin Wil's career by hunting the creature on the 6th floor. Without delay, the protagonist heads to the location mentioned by the professor, believing he will defeat the Baskerville since he has faced one before, as long as he stays away from the flames that nearly turned Kiki into grilled cat. Meanwhile, alongside his friend, Sion has the same target, but his goal is to leave the boy he hates without the credits to graduate. Lyral asks if it is safe for them to go to the 6th floor alone, to which Sion makes it clear that not just anyone can do it. For some reason, only Wil Serfort's presence bothers him, and he will not allow a talentless failure to talk about being a Vander mage under his nose. Pursuing this, he turns to give instructions to his partners on how to deal with the Baskerville, but another creature arrives unannounced and introduces itself by smashing Gordon Barrett against the wall with a punch. Terrified Lyral Mars lets out a scream that can be heard by Wil and Kiki on the other side of the floor. Without thinking twice, the Rizanth dashes towards the sound and notices the terrible presence of an evil sentinel worth 10 credits. Meanwhile, Sion was trying to hit the monster with fire, but it has no effect on the opponent. The habitat of this type of creature is in the depths of the dungeons, so it makes no sense for it to be on the 6th floor. But now there's no point in thinking about what should be. The sentinel is in front of Sion Ulster and looks like it won't leave any of the boy's bones intact. Wil considers saving his classmate, but wonders if he has any obligation to do so after all the insults he has endured. A memory invades his consciousness where Elfaria said how kind and brave he was the same moment he received glasses as a gift from his friend. However, Wil doesn't believe he has these qualities. On the contrary, he considers himself an ordinary, shameful, and lonely person. Regardless, he puts on the glasses he received. Since he has no one by his side, his sword is like an extension of his body, like a solitary blade that traverses the dungeon with extraordinary skill. Meanwhile, Edward alerts Werkner that Sion and his group went to the dungeon, so he asks his colleague to use his familiar to find out the students' whereabouts. While preparing his animal, Werkner asks which floor they ended up on. When he is informed that the students are on the 6th floor, he says it is unnecessary to interfere because that is where Wil is. Swiftly moving between the rocky walls of the dungeon, Wil cuts the sentinel's finger with his Moria silver sword. The power of this blade allows the 6th-year student to cut in half the rocks thrown by the monster's uncontrollable power, keeping the boy in the battle in top form without any signs of being hit. Enjoying his remarkable speed, he leaps over the target and plants his weapon in the evil creature's shoulder, while Sion and Edward cannot believe this is the boy they despised so much. Werkner notes that Wil Serfort is a true irregular, possessing superhuman strength that no mage will ever have, with a physique as robust as a dwarf's and the intuition to understand the enemy's strategy after seeing it only once. As if illuminated, Wil deciphers the enemy's movements in combat and remains intact with unmatched elegance. Then, using the momentum from his own dodge, he slashes the evil sentinel's right arm as if it were a string, causing the target's giant weapon to fall to the ground. In this world of mages, Wil is the only one capable capable of wielding this weapon, which weighs as much as 2 horses. In a last-ditch effort, the demon attacks with a lightning spell, but the Academy student masters the lightning's pressure and crushes the monster. Afterward, he extends his hand to his fallen classmate, but Sion Ulster's envious fury causes only a reaction of hatred. Seeing every movement of the fight from Werkner's magic sphere, Edward cannot accept that a student without magical ability surpasses a prodigy sorcerer, so he leaves the room without further explanation. After everything that happened, Werkner welcomes Wil into his office with the Sentinel's skull on his desk, so he could do nothing but award him the 10 credits he deserves. This is the story of a young man who would turn the world upside down, proving in a world where only magic is considered a true art that a union between wand and sword is possible, an alliance that would be known in the kingdom of Urbis Rigarden as Wistoria. 5 years ago, when he was 10, Wil was humiliated by all his schoolmates. According to many of them, the boy was just bait to attract Lady Elferia to the school. Now that she had become a Vandermage, everyone felt that this kid was no longer needed at the school. After all, he didn't even know how to use magic. Among everyone at the institution, only Professor Werkner seemed to support the boy. Accompanying him to a meeting with Cauldron Anuv, the headmistress, the tutor saw his pupil being presented with a sword, but immediately after he was attacked by numerous spells. Consequently, he threw the professor aside and dealt with each one of them. Seeing this, Cauldron allowed the young man to continue attending the academy, noting that a sword trying to be a wand was quite an interesting case. Wil wanted to know if he would be allowed to climb the tower if he continued studying there, and Cauldron explained that he needed to maintain an extraordinary willpower if he wanted to pursue that goal. Wiping away his tears, the boy adopted a determined expression and gripped the sword tightly as he made his way to the exit. Nowadays, in one of his classes, Werkner teaches the kids that the term "climb the tower" means advancing to the higher institute to become a Vandermage who reign on the top floor of the Mercedes College. To be recognized by the highest center of learning, the higher institute, there are 2 main methods to advance. The first is to create a new type of magic, and the second is to earn at least 7,200 credits at the academy. Since few can achieve the first option, most have to strive for the second. Like it or not, graduation is not easy, and that's why Werkner gives so many extra classes. After one of these classes, Colette comments that the professor is being tough on the student. Wil feels this keenly as he is a disaster with magic, so he needs to focus 100% on credits to survive at the academy. However, the boy thinks Werkner does this for everyone's good because he wants everyone to have a chance to graduate. For instance, Colette thinks that Professor Edward doesn't have the same drive to give extra classes, so she agrees with her friend's point of view. As they walked together down the hallway, the 2 friends saw Lyral Mars saying in a circle that Sion had managed to defeat an evil sentinel, admiring the leader of this fake gang that tries to steal the credits of the true slayer of that powerful beast. Everyone in the group is impressed by the young prodigy's false feat, but he himself knows that none of it is true. On the contrary, Sion was saved by the last person he would want on this earth, the one he humiliated all his life, Wil Serfort. Speaking of the devil, as Wil was passing through the corridor, the cocky student broke through the circle and grabbed his classmate by the collar. After all, he swore Wil had no talent, yet he did what he did as if it were nothing. Colette came back to help her friend and told Sion to stop the nonsense. The guy clenched his fist, wanting to punch the boy who was so humiliated at the institution, but he restrained himself and let him go. As he walked away, his sycophants followed, so Colette asked if there was any beef between Wil and Sion to cause such a strange reaction from the guy. Wil replied that there was, but it was nothing major. Later, Edward tried to convince the headmistress that the boy with the sword needed to be expelled from school, but the woman reminded him that Serfort was in his 6th and final year at the school. The professor argued that a warrior should not be accepted at the institution, as it is known for training the greatest mages in existence. Therefore, it is impossible for someone to graduate without being able to use magic. Cauldron analyzed that the young man had good writing grades, and his reports had an interesting perspective, so much so that he stood out to the point where we can say he is more than excellent. Taking this into consideration, Cauldron noted that the boy could be a healer or an artificer even if he doesn't become a Vandermage. The headmistress reminded the staff that this school has a duty to train educated scholars for the fateful day, but Edward replied that the student in question has no intention of becoming a scholar, only a Vandermage. Cauldron admitted that this was a problem, so she asked Edward to test this student, as he had discovered discovered Wil's secret. The headmistress put Wil's promotion or expulsion in the hands of the professor. Edward questioned if that was really what she wanted because he wasn't as nice as Werkner, but Cauldron was certain of it, so she wanted Edward to test the student to the fullest and determine the truth for himself. After all, as the Dark Viper Mage, no one was better than this professor to understand potential Vander Mages. Meanwhile, Wil Serfort needed Colette's help just to open his locker, as he couldn't use the simplest magic to unlock his personal compartment. Regardless, she didn't mind at all. Ironically, despite having his own characteristic, the boy couldn't carry his sword on campus, and if he returned to the dormitory Mr. Rosti, his roommate would never let him leave. Colette commented that the two seemed to get along well, but Wil responded unconvincingly that it was just a normal relationship. Later in the study room, we'll read that in the year 344 of the magical era, the Battle of Garzeranzo took place. In this conflict, the dwarves, a race from another world, became irritated with the exploitation and overwork and the treatment worse than that given to the elves, so they formed an army to free themselves from it. Seeing that the boy was studying something he had studied numerous times, his friend tried to give him a hint, but he was doing it on purpose because he was analyzing the perspective of other races in the historical context of the war. Colette praised her friend's writing talent, but that's why she thought he didn't need to try so hard. Anyway, Wil doesn't want to lose a single credit and miss the chance to fulfill his dream, so he wants to give his best. Besides, understanding how the dwarves felt in this battle is valuable in itself, because the Battle of Garzeranzo showed that the dwarves, even in the face of powerful magic, were able to fight, and this has a strong connection with what Serfort experiences in the day-to-day life of the school. One of the dwarves' sayings for this war was, "Never give up," and Wil takes that to heart. That said, Edward arrives to summon the student for the test in the spell hall. Once there, the teacher explains that he came to personally assess the student's worth, so he orders Wil to try to land a single blow on him. If he succeeds, he will receive 5 credits, but if he fails, he will be expelled from the academy. According to the teacher, those who do not have talent for sorcery should not even consider the possibility of becoming a Vander Mage. At the same time, Headmistress Cauldron calls Werkner and reveals the confrontation happening at that very moment. She warns Werkner not to interfere in this test, because just as she allowed Werkner to make a special intervention with this student outside of the regular curriculum, Edward also has the right to put his method into practice, being such a respected mage. Werkner finds a test of this level unfair because Professor Ed was the closest of all to becoming a Vander Mage. Living up to his name, Edward casts powerful spells against the inexperienced student, who dodges as best he can from those low-level dark magics, but they still exuded unmatched potency. Since his stay at the school is at stake, Wil doesn't want to lag behind in this duel, so he advances against his opponent with above-average speed. Even so, the teacher's defense proves impenetrable, and Ed protects himself without even having to move, maintaining distance through his magic. On top of that, Ed continues to disdain the student, reaffirming that he is hopeless. With that said, he casts a spell on the boy that breaks his glasses. After taking a heavy hit, Wil notices that the teacher is casting without reciting, activating his spells with frightening speed. As if that wasn't enough, the young man starts coughing up blood, and the fatigue of his body tells him that he won't even be able to scratch his rival. With the student on the ground, Edward warns that he will only use 2 spells, his black flames to burn and his shield to repel the boy's unpleasant savagery. Then, quoting one of the academy's doctrines, the teacher teaches that a student incapable of mastering 1,000 spells should strive to master a single one, and this single spell will become like 1,000 arrows. With that said, Ed overlaps several spells on top of just one, like an endless spiral of spells. Before unleashing all that magical mass on the student, he says that those without talent should disappear. Thus, the series of spells is relentlessly released and hits Wil Serfort with brutal force, leaving him no chance to react. For the first time, Wil faces a high-level mage and can't even wield his sword in this test. In the locker room, Colette wonders if her friend is okay because she doesn't imagine a personal test from Ed for him being anything very beneficial. Actually, it's probably more like a torture session or something like that. Suddenly, Kiki appears bleeding and scratching Wil's locker, so Colette opens her friend's compartment to see what the familiar wants to convey with that. Meanwhile, Edward takes advantage of the fact that Wil was studying the Dwarf Rebellion to ask him how many mages it took to exterminate the 10,000 dwarves dwarves that rose up against the order. Immediately, without letting the boy answer, he informs that only one sorcerer was enough because that's how the world works. For this reason, the teacher believes the young man should give up his stupid dream. On the other hand, no matter how the world is, Wil makes it clear that he does not intend to give up his goal. Holding the glasses given by Alferia, he states that he wants to be by the side of the person he loves by fulfilling the promise he made to Elfie. According to Edward, this desire is dirty and immoral, considering that a pathetic love cannot be the motivation to aspire to the pinnacle of sorcery. Not caring about the teacher's insults, Wil assures that he will see the sunset with his friend. At that moment, after being guided by Kiki, Colette throws the sword to him and the feared blade of Moria cuts the spell cast by Ed right afterward. Mercilessly, the teacher unleashes a new magical onslaught that engulfs the student's body like a purple inferno. Wil's arms and legs begin to tremble, and he is certain he will be burned alive in the middle of the school. His desire is to run away to save his life, but doing so means his definitive expulsion from the academy, and consequently the end of his life's dream. Therefore, he advances through the magical obstacles imposed by his opponent and uses his blade as a torch in the darkness, making his way while reflecting that the Battle of Garzinoso has more details than Professor Edward wanted to tell. For instance, a brave dwarf general named Gareth fought even when he lost all his brothers and despite everything struck a single blow against the enemy mage. In honor of his bravery, the mages began to recognize the dignity of the dwarf rebellion. That day became known as the day the sword overcame the wand. So as if he were Gareth, Wil Serfort uses his skills to break through the rival mage's blockade and make his face bleed with the sharp blade of Moria. Indignant, Ed withdraws and grants the 5 credits as a reward. In the headmistress's office, Cauldron and Workner analyze the brilliantly executed strategy by the student and acknowledge that the young man is fearless. At night, in the vicinity of the Magic Academy, someone prepares a meal while waiting for Wil to join them for dinner.